In the House of the Dragon, Rhaenyra promised her son Luke a warm reception in Storm's End from Lord Borros Baratheon, and, Luke kinda got one. Not in the way we were expecting. Not the open-handed courtesy of a great lord honored to host a prince in his hall, but instead the jaws of Vhagar, the crankiest old dragon nanny that there ever was. But what happened to that warm welcome that Rhaenyra expected from Lord Borros? Why was the Lord of Storm's End such a dick to Lucerys and doomed the boy by throwing him out of his hall for Aemond to play with? To start off with, let's go over exactly what happened before we descend into extreme nerdery. So to start off with, at the Black Council on Dragonstone, new Queen Rhaenyra I and her counselors are trying to decide which of her possibly rebellious vassals they will send messages to and who will bring them. Up for grabs, at least according to their combined wisdom, is the North, the Riverlands, the Vale, and the Stormlands. Although Otto Hightower has already dispatched his own ravens and messengers with offers, Rhaenyra believes she has an edge since the lords of houses Stark, Baratheon, Tully, and Arryn all swore oaths to defend her claim personally, or their parents did way back in episode 1. While clearly these oaths mean nothing to the Lannisters and Hightowers, the Blacks feel there's a pretty good shot that those four houses will stay loyal to her. Prince Jace suggests that he and his younger brother Luke should be the messengers, trying to not only seem brave and useful, but making the point that Rhaenyra's messages will carry more weight being delivered by princes on Dragonback. Not so sure about the last part of that, but we'll get back to that a little bit later. The Council and Rhaenyra agree to keep Rhaenys back as a defense against the sneak attack, while Daemon, Jace, and Luke fall off to call their banners. Rhaenyra gives her sons their assignments. Jace will take the harder journey to the Vale for the errands and then fly north for the Starks of Winterfell. Storm's End is much closer, and Rhaenyra anticipates that Lord Borros will roll over immediately, making it the easier mission, so she sends the younger Luke and his itty-bitty dragon Arax. She then gives them both her written messages for the lords and makes them promise to not get in any fights. Just act as messengers and then come back to her. Both boys agree and they fly off. Lucerys finds himself in a massive, ominous storm of foreshadowing in the Stormlands. Weird, I wonder if that's where the name comes from. As he lands Arax in the courtyard, he looks out into the storm and sees the enormous Vhagar lounging outside the walls, eyeing them like a goat in Jurassic Park. Rather than immediately leaving to come back later knowing the danger that Aemond and Vhagar represent, Luke steels himself to complete his mission as a messenger and instead goes inside. Luke finds in the hall of Lord Borros Aemond One-Eye, quivering with rage at seeing Luke and a nonplussed Lord Borros himself. If Vhagar wasn't a big enough hint, this should have been enough for Luke to turn around and leave and come back later. But he doesn't, and instead he delivers his message to the Lord of Storm's End, unfortunately, who then has to call for a maester to read it to him as Borros is illiterate. After being read Rhaenyra's message, Borros scoffs at being commanded like a dog. During all of this, Aemond can take no more and in a rage commands Luke to cut out his own eye in payment for his own. And Borros orders Luke removed from the hall to stop the violence. Not to stop the attack on Luke, just for it to be, out of sight, out of mind. Aemond takes the hint and runs to Granny Vhagar, jumps on, and then chases Luke before losing control of his dragon, who turns Luke and Arax into assorted pieces of meat. So, what exactly happened here? Well, to figure out what happened with Borros and the death of Luke, we're going to peel back this onion one layer at a time so we can get a whole understanding of this pivotal scene that turned a war of letters and messengers into one of fire and blood. This is a straightforward one. We can just listen to what Borros said his problems with Rhaenyra's letter actually were. Easy life. Borros' first problem is that he is prideful and resents that Rhaenyra is ordering him around like some chump vassal and not the powerful, important lord of Storm's End. Really not happy that Rhaenyra just kind of gestured at her dragon's ability to kill him and his entire family, and that reminding him of his father Bormon's oath alone will convince Borros to support her over the newly crowned Aegon. You can sort of see it's a bit of a pickle for the Lord of the Stormlands. He's stuck between two dragons in a hard place. And also his other main complaint, that Luke wasn't even sent with an offer of marriage between any of Rhaenyra's many children and Borros' 4 daughters, the Four Storms. Clearly on the green side, Aemond came to Storm's Edge with the understanding that if necessary, he could offer himself in a marriage pact to one of the Four Storms for Lord Borros' loyalty. Luke had no such luck or no such offer. Luke had no offer to make. Again, leaning into Borros' feelings of disrespect because he might not like or even know Aegon at all, but at least his brain trust sent out a demand for loyalty with a backup plan to buy him off. This is a real problem for Borros, not just that his pride is being hurt. As with Aemond, if Luke had showed up with a great marriage proposal, Borros probably would have gotten over his hurt feelings and made the deal. Although we know from her dialogue previously why Rhaenyra believes she didn't need to try and buy off Borros. She thinks very highly of the Baratheons and their loyalty and honor. They would never betray her nor their oaths. She feels that she is complimenting Borros by sending a prince and a dragon instead of a raven and respecting his honor rather than insulting him by offering a package of goods. Not how Borros saw it though. Makes you wonder what inflection the maester used when reading her note. Did the crafty maester deliberately deliver the words in a tone to piss off Borros and serve the high towers by driving a wedge between stag and dragon? Put on that conspiracy helmet. Whatever really happened there, you can see from Borros' perspective with two dragons on his doorstep and a war potentially turning on his decision, why Rhaenyra's messenger and offer were not taken as compliments but instead serious insults. But of course, this whole thing goes much deeper than what Borros said aloud. I know, it's surprising me too that Borros can't read Baratheon has depth. First one, of course, is who got sent to him as a messenger. Lucerys, quote-unquote, Velaryon. Luke is barely into his tween years, clearly sent to Borros because Rhaenyra didn't consider him as someone who needed finessing, or really anything other than handing over her letter. It's instead being treated as a training run of sorts for the future Lord of Driftmark. In less tense times as Westeros stands on the brink of war, you can imagine this would be something that Lord Borros would take as a compliment and graciously welcome the prince into his hall for a visit. But that's not what this is. It's a key political negotiation, and Rhaenyra sent a wet behind the ears prince to treat with a primary vassal who wields huge power in this realm. This has to work if Rhaenyra and her side wants to win this war, and she didn't really treat it that way. That insult is compounded when we delve beyond the veneer of Luke's true identity. Although the Blacks have been steadfastly declaring over and over and over again that Luke, Jason, Joffrey are all the sons of Laenor Velaryon, nobody believes it. The whole realm knows they are the fruit of Harwin Strong's loins, and that includes Borros Baratheon. Luke is sent to play on the heartstrings of how Luke is actually part Baratheon through Princess Rhaenys, that in his veins also runs the blood of Orys Baratheon and Durin Durrandon. But that's not true, and it's an affront to Borros' pride to be told by Luke and Rhaenyra to uphold his father's oaths, when in the minds of many in Westeros, Rhaenyra has proven she herself is untrustworthy and can't keep her own vows to Laenor Velaryon, whom, by the way, most people think that Rhaenyra had killed to marry her uncle Daemon, not doing wonders for her reputation. Luke is a walking symbol that while Rhaenyra demands Borros have honor and stick to the oaths of his father, that is a standard that she is unwilling to meet. If Luke were really who Rhaenyra claimed he was, a Baratheon and Velaryon by blood and someone who could hold a political negotiation as a prince of the realm, his arrival very well could have swayed Borros to at least not outright dismiss Rhaenyra's bid for loyalty. But he's not. He's none of those things. Borros thinks clearly that if Rhaenyra wanted to show she took him seriously, it would have been a serious person that showed up. Someone like Daemon, Rhaenys, or even maybe Rhaenyra herself in his hall. Instead, it's a strong bastard pretending to be a Velaryon and a Baratheon, and an unamused lord who sees through the charade. Onion layer number 3, Granny Vhagar. Let's not forget, of course, that Borros is not free to act as he pleases when Luke arrives. Aemond One-Eye is standing inside Storm's End, otherwise known as a dangerous and unpredictable prince who feels like any moment could draw his sword and just go on a killing spree, especially after he sees Lucerys. And Aemond just finished negotiating a marriage pact between himself and his pick of Lord Baratheon's daughters. So, Borros taking Luke and his message seriously in this moment is a good way to undo the alliance he just made, and or make the unpredictable prince in his hall maybe go on a killing spree, which would be bad, I guess. In that sense, Borros really has his hands tied by Luke's arrival. Even if he wanted to treat with Rhaenyra in good faith, a dubious proposition, but let's say that he did. He risks Aemond turning on him for even hearing out Prince Lucerys. Oh, and I'm forgetting something. What is it? Oh yeah, remember how Aemond arrived in Storm's End? He flew the biggest dragon in the world, Granny Vhagar, who is just aching to commit some more war crimes like the good old days. Vhagar has the capability of roasting Lord Borros and his entire line of dragonfire before going back to Wheel of Fortune. Of course, Aemond would rather not have that happen, given he'd just cut a deal with the Lord of Storm's End. He got what he wanted. He wants Borros to live, but Vhagar still can, and Aemond can command her to do it, and Borros knows that acutely. The threat of Vhagar is keen, forcing the Lord of Storm's End to make a deal with Aemond. Ironically, the very same threat that Rhaenyra attempted to leverage, although her threat packs slightly less punch when she sends the itty-bitty air axe versus, Vhagar. The Hightowers showed their resolve by actually sending their war crime machine instead of, alluding to it via letter delivered by a baby dragon. Beyond the imminent threat of violence Aemond and Vhagar represent, this is a failure by Rhaenyra and her side to uphold their side of the feudal contract to Borros. In a vassal contract, the vassal promises to their liege, in exchange for taxes, soldiers, and their loyalty, that the ruler grants them lands, justice, and people to rule. But most importantly, what they get out of this is protection from attackers, domestic and foreign. With Vhagar dominating the scene, Rhaenyra is unable to provide that critical protection for Lord Borros' life, his family, and his lands. This is a lot more important than any marriage pact. By sending Luke alone on his baby dragon, Borros is not getting what he needs out of recognizing Rhaenyra as his queen. After all, what's the point of staying true to his father's oath? It will lead to the end of his line from Vhagar's flames, or a total destruction of his lands and people by the Hightower forces in open war. There's really not one, and the lack of choice is surely weighing heavily on Borros' mind as the two princes on dragons squabble over their childhood rivalry. How can the Baratheons escape this exploding situation and dragon flame erupting in front of him with their lives, family, castle, and holdings intact? It's kind of tricky. The fear of Vhagar and Aemond is largely why Borros sends Luke back out into the storm to leave. As Rhaenyra said, when the dragons go to war, everything turns to ash. Borros could have tried to order Aemond to leave and give Luke shelter inside the castle as a guest, or threaten to maybe break the marriage pact with the Greens if Aemond doesn't relent. But the immediate threat of retribution from Aemond with his sword or dragon is far too volatile for Borros to stand up to. In Borros' mind, Luke being harmed by Aemond is a cost he feels he has to pay to avoid Vhagar's flames and Hightower's swords turning the Baratheons and their lands to ash. After all, it's not like Borros and Luke are blood related, right? What is the life of one bastard boy against a kingdom anyway? What a silly question. Much like my video about Willem Blackwood and his killing of Gerald Bracken in Storm's End years earlier, there's a major issue at play here, and it goes straight back to Viserys the Peaceful style of rule and the lessons he imparted on his chosen heir, Rhaenyra. Viserys' reign found him mostly staying in King's Landing, enjoying parties, going on hunts and tourneys nearby, but not really being an active ruler throughout his realm. The previous monarchs, Jaehaerys and Alysanne, had spent much of their reigns not seated on the Iron Throne, but making progresses, otherwise known as trips, to see their vassals personally. In these times, travel takes forever and is potentially very dangerous, which causes widespread isolation between the nobility. Many of the major lords may have only met each other once years earlier at some wedding or a tourney, and some not at all. The same goes for their relationship to their king, and unless the king makes a great effort to interact with their vassals, it is very, very hard to build and maintain relationships. The Targaryen solution was these progresses, taking advantage of the dragons making travel trivial, as well as tools to wow or intimidate their vassals, and journeyed across Westeros regularly. They would show up at a lord's castle, hold court, attend balls and hunts and tourneys, and spend quality time. They'd also take care of local needs, arranging alliances, marriages, and solving long-running grievances with a personal touch. Viserys' predecessors, King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne in particular, made these relationships a major priority of their reign and contributed enormously to the decades-long peace and prosperity of the Iron Throne. Alysanne in particular took great pains to make marriages that created alliances that knitted Westeros into a strong social fabric which supported the prolonged peace her husband reigned over. Viserys did not do these things, even though he benefited from them. As I said, he was content to mostly stay in and around King's Landing throughout his reign. He did throw a lot of parties and hunts for his lords to come meet him, but that's not the same thing as honoring the lord by choosing to visit their homes and lands. The difference between seeing someone at a party versus going on a trip with them. It's a half measure compared to the previous frequent royal progresses. As a result, prickly, introverted, upset, or faraway lords rarely interacted with the crown. We hear from Lucerys partially why he did it this way when he complains to Rhaenyra that every lord who comes to see him has self-interest in mind. He saw these progresses as base manipulations of himself rather than genuine good times, and a tiresome chore that took away from his very important royal duties, like carving models and reading about Valyria. The quote from the show that Viserys would have been happy as a country lord with his nose in books is really descriptive here, and tells a lot about why he didn't do these things. Unfortunately, this led to many houses getting ignored over time, and one of the primary ones is the Baratheons of Storm's End. We've seen in the show that Lord Borman did make appearances at court to try and get his foot in the door. However, out of quite clear self-interest, Ser Otto did his best to keep the Baratheons at arm's length, and play up how they voted for Rhaenys and not Viserys as monarch to keep the hurt feelings from healing. Viserys didn't see through this ploy from Otto and remained standoffish with the Lords of Storm's End until his last days. There was an attempt to mend this relationship during Rhaenyra's search for a husband, as we saw. Storm's End is chosen as one of the major stops in Rhaenyra's tour of dudes, a great honor for the Baratheons to put their best foot forward for their future monarch. Although we never see Lord Borros during the proceeding, it is certain he was there as a younger man and would have interacted with Rhaenyra. Unfortunately, Rhaenyra's annoyance with the cattle show fails to impress Lord Bormont, and we can infer the rest of his family. As I discussed previously, her lack of political skill at this time when she inflamed the Blackwoods and Brackens into restarting their feud was a really uninspiring display. After Rhaenyra marries Laenor Velaryon, she does the same thing her father did. She stays in King's Landing. There she stays until the outing of Harwin Strong as her baby daddy, and then she takes her family to Dragonstone. Now we do see over the course of years that Rhaenyra has dramatically improved her political skills from when she was a teenager. However, the isolationist streak she has learned from Lucerys has not gone away. It has likely been many years since Rhaenyra has even talked to Borros face to face. Her poor read of Borros' character and how he will react to Luke's arrival is so far off that there's really no other explanation. She met Borros once or twice, read the ravens his maesters would write, and that seems to be really the extent of how well she knows Lord Borros. It's a tragic miscalculation of the man that contributes to the death of her son. Actually, thinking about it, her description of Lord Borros is much more like his father, Bormont, who absolutely was in life a man of honor who kept his word above all else and played a great host to Rhaenyra in her youth. Borros, not so much. Now, in her defense, it is understandable why she felt she had to stay in King's Landing, as her future as queen depended so much on countering the Hightower faction at court and keeping her father's favor. It's hard to fight for control of the small council when you're not there, but not doing progresses and creating alliances and relationships with her future vassals is the price of trying to maintain your position at court. The realm is not just the Iron Throne. It's especially glaring that Rhaenyra, Viserys, and Daemon could have locked up the Baratheon alliance years earlier, and George just tells us how. The Four Storms. Lord Borros has 4 teenage to adult daughters nicknamed the Four Storms for their very strong personalities. At the start of the dance, all 4 daughters are neither betrothed nor married. Anyone seeking to make an ally of Lord Borros would only have to show up with a son and an offer, and he would likely jump at the opportunity. And hey, remember that time Viserys was looking for a wife and didn't even consider the Four Storms? Yeah, that one did not age well. And wouldn't you know it, Rhaenyra has nothing but sons, an overabundance of sons, all of them unbetrothed until she's forced to sell them to Princess Rhaenys for the Velaryon loyalty and navy. Now, in fairness, all of Rhaenyra's sons are either teenagers or literally children, whereas the Four Storms appear to be adults, so it's not like there could be an immediate marriage except possibly with Jace. But a long-term betrothal backing up an alliance is certainly doable. It's incredibly obvious this is what Viserys, Rhaenyra, and Daemon should have done years ago now, either for Luke or Jace. Pick one of the Four Storms, pick one of her sons, lock up the Stormlands in Lord Borros' support. Done deal. It should have been included in Luke's message and instructions as well, that Rhaenyra will marry their families together for the alliance. Even her decision to send a letter with Luke to be read is again a sign that Rhaenyra is out of touch with her supposed vassal. Borros is illiterate and has to have all his letters read to him by the maesters, a thing he finds annoying and personally insulted by. Someone who knew Borros well would know not to give Luke just a written message, but instructions to deliver it himself out loud. There's a lot of unforced errors here that all stem from the isolationism that Rhaenyra learned from her father all too well. It's the same in the pattern of not knowing how easy it would be for her to reignite the Blackwood and Bracket feud. These are key parts of being an effective ruler that Rhaenyra did not learn because they were not taught to her. As with before, Rhaenyra remains a tragic figure in how her father insists that she must be the queen, yet then does very little to prepare her for that role effectively. Earlier I said that Viserys' king was not inclined to be nice to the Baratheons, and the reason for it is how Viserys got to the throne in the first case. The Great Council of 101 came about because of a curious death. Heir to the Iron Throne, Prince Aemond Targaryen. Aemond had taken his dragon Tyraxes the Tarth in an attempt to fight off invading Myrish pirates in the area. Somehow, in a crazy accident, Aemond gets hit in the throat by an arrow meant for the Lord standing next to him, and then drowns in his own blood. Aemond was the long-term heir to the Iron Throne, the eldest son of King Jaehaerys and Alysanne, and married to Jocelyn Baratheon, daughter of Lord Rhaegar Baratheon. See Alysanne working her magic on alliances? She recognizes the importance of the Stormlands and makes sure the heir and the Baratheons are stitched together in marriage. Okay, but no big deal, right? Aemond is 37, has at least one child, and Jaehaerys and Alysanne have a ton of kids. Well, there is a bit of a big deal. Aemond and Jocelyn only have one child, and that child is Princess Rhaenys. As House of the Dragon has made clear, the Lords of Westeros are really not fond of the idea of a female monarch, and neither is Jaehaerys himself, who has a long history during his life of not treating the women in his family as equals. The king and his lords end up seeking to remove Rhaenys from her inheritance, telling themselves that it's to save the realm from civil war, and they have an out. Jaehaerys' other remaining son, Prince Balon. Balon looks like he's going to do a great job until he very suddenly dies of a burst appendix on a hunt, which they covered in the show. And now things get a little bit trickier because it's no longer a son versus a granddaughter. It's a grandson versus a granddaughter, and Rhaenys has preference because her father Aemond was older. And even though this makes it sound like Rhaenys is the logical choice, the lords once again want to choose against her, and they have their option. Rhaenys' cousin Viserys. He rode Balerion the Black Dread. He's married, and he's known for being calm and amenable. And most importantly, he's a dude. This is a tricky situation, however, because Rhaenys can't just be put aside. She has the backing of her mother's family and the Baratheons, her suddenly rich and powerful husband Corlys Velaryon and his fleet, her popularity within the realm, and most importantly, that she's a formidable dragon rider on Meleys, the Red Queen. To remove her succession might lead to open war anyway. A war Viserys seems unlikely to want to fight and win. So what is Jaehaerys to do? Well, he gets a suggestion from his son, Archmaester Vhagar, to call a Great Council, which he does, the Great Council of 101 at Harrenhal, hoping to convince Rhaenys and her allies to back down without a fight. We saw this in the opening shot of House of the Dragon Episode 1. Jaehaerys' plan works, and Viserys is elected in a landslide, at least according to the Maesters, by all the Lords of Westeros as the next monarch, effectively cutting off Rhaenys and her line from the Iron Throne. Convenient how that happens. The results eloquently demonstrate to Rhaenys and Corlys how screwed they would be if they tried to start a war. The Baratheons and the Velaryons, along with their primary allies in the Starks, Blackwoods, Celtigars, Manderleys, and Dustins, are furious at the outcome of the voting and remain so for years to come. It's important to point out, though, that none of this is really Viserys' fault nor Rhaenys'. However, the outcome of the Great Council created a rift in the House of the Dragon for years. Thanks, Jaehaerys. Corlys in particular took the loss very hard. We saw during Season 1 how he is laser focused on restoring Rhaenys to where she belongs on the Iron Throne, either personally or through their grandchildren. Much of the season saw Viserys and Rhaenyra attempting to heal this wound from decades earlier. Even Grand Maester Mellos suggests that Viserys should marry Laena over Alicent Hightower, specifically to finally end the lingering feud, bring the Velaryons and their dragons back into the fold properly, appeasing Corlys and the Baratheons, make good with Rhaenys, and move forward as a united Valyrian powerhouse, the same one that conquered Westeros. The reason for this is obvious. The primary military and political power for House Targaryen comes from the dragons and their alliance of Valyrian houses. Behind them since the conquest have stood houses Velaryon, Baratheon, and Celtigar, serving as the boots on the ground and the ships in the sea that keep the dragons' backs guarded. Most Westerosi houses this early into the reign have been looking for ways to send the Valyrian invaders packing back to the Smoking Sea. Unsurprisingly, most of them were not happy about being conquered. If the Targaryens lost the support of their primary alliances, could potentially be a fatal blow to their dynasty. And we saw Viserys and Rhaenyra both act on this, making attempts to bring the Sea Snake and his kin back into the fold, which they eventually did. You may notice one house was missing from this, the Baratheons. They were just as insulted by Rhaenys being denied as Velaryons, even more so since Rhaenys is a Baratheon by blood. Lord Bormund and later Borros both chaff at having to bend the knee to Viserys and Rhaenyra, knowing how badly their family got screwed out of the Iron Throne for the peaceful and the realm's delight. Viserys took the efficient path and decided that if he kept Rhaenys happy personally, then the Baratheons would be happy by extension, which, sort of works. Rhaenys holds sway over her cousins and Lord Bormund in particular, with Bormund openly calling her the queen who never was in front of the king. Wherever Rhaenys decides to go politically, it's likely her cousins would follow. Borros Baratheon, though, took it personally how the crown spent all its time fixing the relationship with Corlys and Rhaenys, while pretty much ignoring him despite being a tremendously powerful lord in the realm. As he said in response to Rhaenyra, he is not a dog to be ordered around, but that's how he's been treated in his own eyes, taken for granted and not given the respect he feels his house deserves in this alliance. Where's the marriage proposal for one of the four storms and Viserys after Aemma's death? Or what about Aegon or Aemond? Borros is not wrong to feel that the crown has become obsessed with the Velaryons and ignores him as one of their primary allies. Unfortunately, with Bormund's death and Borros' ascension, that love affair with Rhaenys is diminished. Bormund and Rhaenys were very close. Borros, not so much. It's a relationship that needs to be renewed by Rhaenys with her second cousin, and that's who really should have gone to secure the loyalty of Borros Baratheon. The show gives a flimsy reason that Rhaenys needs to guard against the sneak attack against Dragonstone. It's not a very convincing reason and seems like something they wrote in to justify why she didn't go. Rhaenys should have gone and come back within the same day, turned her charm on Borros, and not been intimidated by Aemond. Perhaps she would have been wise enough to turn around at seeing Vhagar and come back another day. Or if not, she probably would have been smart enough to try and forge an alliance to get her kin on her side and been empowered to do so by Rhaenyra. There's a long simmering problem between the Baratheon and Targaryen houses that goes all the way back to Aegon the Conqueror. Aegon and Orys were best friends, with Orys described as Aegon's only friend. During the conquest, Orys led the armies of the dragon and became the first hand of the king, having the full trust of Aegon the Conqueror. That sounds like everything should be great between their houses, right? Well, not so much. Problem is that they are not two families, but one. Officially, Aegon the Conqueror only had two siblings, his sister wives Rhaenys and Visenya. However, that's not quite true. According to the Maesters and histories, he had a half-brother as well, Orys. Aegon's father, Aerion, had the dragon seed Orys on an unknown woman, and despite being a bastard son, he was raised alongside the true-born Aegon in a relationship that greatly resembles another famous true-born bastard relationship, Jon Snow and Robb Stark. The two men's friendship and trust went well beyond any king and vassal relationship, with Aegon gifting his half-brother the entirety of the powerful Stormlands and the ancient seat of the now defeated House Durrandon, Storm's End. And as you can imagine from two great childhood friends, Orys stayed loyal the rest of his life to his half-brother. So what's the problem? The problem that happens is that, of course, the two men eventually died, and something happened that Catelyn Stark knows very well. After the supposed deaths of Bran and Rickon, as well as the disappearance of Arya and the marriage of Sansa to Tyrion Lannister, Robb Stark changes his will on who should follow him as king in the north. With few other options, Robb wants to legitimize and name his trusted half-brother Jon Snow as his heir until he has a child of his own. However, Catelyn points out the problem with this, the not-so-great history of legitimizing bastards in Westeros.
Precedent, she said bitterly. Yes, Aegon IV legitimized all his bastards on his deathbed, and how much pain Grief, war, and murder grew from that. I know you trust Jon, but can you trust his sons or their sons? The Blackfyre pretenders troubled the Targaryens for 5 generations until Barristan the Bold slew the last of them on the Stepstones. If you make Jon legitimate, there's no way to turn him bastard again. Should he wed and breed, any sons you may have by Jain will never be safe. Jon would never harm a son of mine, no more than Theon Greyjoy would harm Bran or Rickon. Grey Wind leapt up atop King Tristar's crypt, his teeth bared. Robb's own face was cold. That is as cruel as it is unfair. Jon is no Theon. So you pray. Have you considered your sisters? What of their rights? I agree that the North must not be permitted to pass to the Imp, but what if Arya, by law, she comes after Sansa, your own sister, trueborn, and dead? No one has seen or heard of Arya since they cut father's head off. Why do you lie to yourself? Arya's gone, the same as Bran and Rickon, and they'll kill Sansa too once the dwarf gets a child from her. Jon is the only brother that remains to me. Should I die without issue, I want him to succeed me. I had hoped you would support my choice. I cannot, she said. In all else, Robb, in everything. But not in this folly. Do not ask it. I don't have to. I'm the king.
This is often quoted as one of Catelyn's worst moments, showing her prejudice against bastards and Jon Snow in particular. Her problem is actually what happens in the next few generations. Jon would never hurt Robb or his children because they love each other. The same cannot be said for their children or grandchildren. A few generations down the line, when Robb and Jon are dust in tombs, would the two branches of House Stark go to war over Winterfell? It's not even the first time this happened. The Grey Starks of White Harbor fought the main family in a brutal civil war, and the Karstarks have also held a long simmering resentment towards their more illustrious house members. And this is exactly what happened to the relationship between the Baratheons and Targaryens post Orys and Aegon. The bastard cousins of the Baratheons were never given the chance they wanted most of all, to be equal to the main line. And by that, I mean dragons and eggs. Systematically, the Baratheons were denied access to dragons and eggs by the main line of the house, reinforcing which ones are the Dragon Lords and which ones are the bastards. The Baratheons can be the Storm Lords and inherit the legacy of the Durrandons through Orys's marriage to Argella Durrandon, but not the legacy of Valyria. That is above them. That is saved for the Targaryens. It becomes clear throughout the years that the Baratheons after Orys did not see the Stormlands as their true legacy and began to thirst for the Iron Throne and the dragons their kin rode throughout the skies. They also clamored for marriages to the royal line, with Lord Rhaegar Baratheon marrying Dowager Queen Alyssa Velaryon, clearly hoping for dragon-riding children from the queen who had birthed 4 dragon riders already. Wisely, Queen Alysanne recognized this rift and attempted to heal it by giving the Baratheons a royal marriage between the heir to the Iron Throne, Prince Aemond, and Jocelyn Baratheon. From the two of them came the first dragon rider from Orys's line, the queen who never was, Rhaenys. It's easy to see why Lord Borman is so fond of his cousin as well as the rest of his house. Rhaenys, despite being raised as a Targaryen, is the fulfillment of the promise of their true Valyrian bloodline. A future queen that can ride a dragon proves that the Baratheons are equals even if they don't have the Valyrian look. Not just the Velaryons are fit for royal marriages that create dragon riders, but the Stags of Storm's End can do it as well. It's everything they have wanted. Unfortunately for the main Baratheon family, as discussed, they took it rather hard when Rhaenys and by extension their house was rejected by the Great Council. And it stung just a little bit more when Rhaenys married into the Velaryons and began giving birth to Velaryon dragon riders. Previous to Rhaenys, no member of House Velaryon had ever rode a dragon, nor were they given dragon eggs to hatch like the Targaryens. Of course, many members of House Targaryen were part Velaryon, but Rhaenys changed that, with her 2 children, Laenor and Laena, claiming sea smoke and Vhagar. Somehow the promise of being equal to their Targaryen cousins slipped away from the Baratheons, stolen by the Velaryons and Lord Corlys. And in all this time, nary an invitation from the crown for the Baratheons to go to Dragonstone, be given eggs to hatch like Rhaenyra's children, or even the opportunity to tame their own dragons. The rejection of Rhaenys and the rise of the Velaryons emphasized for the Stags that they are still lesser than. Long after the Dance of the Dragons, the rivalry between the dragons and the Stags continued to re-emerge throughout the generations. The prickly Stormlords have not forgotten that they are the blood of the dragon, even if their cousins seem to. For Lord Borros, the arrival of Arax aren't quite the grand gesture that Rhaenyra thinks they will be, nor her message reminding Borros of the power of Dragonflame. He and his forefathers are acutely aware that they have been denied dragons and their power, and must jump like dogs when the Targaryens command or else be burned like the rest of Westeros. King Jaehaerys and his sister Rhaena both made similar threats to Lord Rhaegar Baratheon, Borros' grandfather, Rhaena in particular shouting in his hall and in his face that she would make a Harrenhal of Storm's End with Dreamfire. Rather than being an effective way of getting the Borros' loyalty, Rhaenyra inadvertently opened that old wound anew. And not to pile on, but of course the Baratheons are prickly about their origins as a bastard house. Their identity as the Stormlords and their stag sigil are ones that they took from the Durrandons after defeating them. Their home, Storm's End, is a castle built by somebody else. They were forced to adopt the identity of another family because their own truth as the blood of the dragon had been denied to them. Of course, they made do, and they took pride in being the new Durrandons as best they could. That pride, though, masked the sore spot in their hearts. Just as Catelyn described the great bastards of King Aegon IV and Jon's potential offspring, that they wish to be whole and trueborn, that they should be flying dragons with their cousins instead of kneeling to them. Taking that all together, imagine Borros' reaction when Lucerys Velaryon shows up at his doorstep on a baby dragon, a bastard boy on a dragon that the entire realm knows is neither Velaryon nor Baratheon, and Borros has to sit there, knowing that Lucerys is not the grandchild of Rhaenys and not his own blood, taking a message from him and his mother who disgraced herself in his father's hall. An insult and a reminder that even the Strongs now are being given dragon eggs and leave to ride them, while the blood of the Conqueror and the Baratheons are not. It is the perfect storm for setting off Borros' anger, and you can understand why he did not react well. So taking us all together, I think we have really unwrapped that onion and laid out why Lord Borros, who was thought to be an easy visit for the novice Lucerys, instead turned into a white-hot rage when commanded by Rhaenyra to join her side. Of course, none of this excuses Lord Borros for what he did in sending out Aemond Lucerys into the storm after seeing how bloodthirsty Aemond had become. Borros knew that Lucerys is likely to be maimed by Aemond and possibly die by dragonflame from Vhagar. He could have asserted that Aemond must leave, protecting Lucerys with Borros' own body, castle, and marriage alliance that Aemond just agreed to. It would have been the right thing to do, the honorable thing to do, even as Borros raged inside like the storm outside his hall. He knows that none of this is Lucerys' fault. He's just a boy carrying a message for his mother, and unfortunately several lifetimes of emotional baggage that he had no part in creating. Also, I want to emphasize that while I lay a lot of blame at Rhaenyra's feet for not playing the situation with Borros particularly well, that much like the duel of the Blackwoods and the Brackens that went awry in front of her, she's doing the best she can for someone who has not really been prepared or educated to be the next monarch effectively. And also to point out that nobody in her council disagreed with her either. Even Rhaenys, who should know better than to test her cousin Borros' pride, thought that Lucerys could handle delivering the message no problem. And that literally no one expected Aemond in particular to be there with Vhagar. He could have easily been sent to Highgarden, the Eyrie, the Riverlands, or the North to instead to bargain for loyalty. It's a wild coincidence that Aemond and Luke in particular arrived at Storm's End on the same day. It's almost like an author who enjoys making every possible thing that could go wrong at the worst possible time, designed a scenario where a seemingly harmless decision on which son would deliver messages instead goes horribly wrong. That a child died in the mouth of a dragon, ignoring its rider's pleas to stop, and a war that could have ended before it started instead became inevitable. And then he, and the team of writers for House of the Dragon, gave us all the information we would need to understand what happened and why. How it wasn't a random whoopsie, but instead the culmination of generations of angst and resentment that erupted like the 14 flames in the Stormlands. So before we finish this overly detailed look at a critical moment in this very fictional history, let's look forwards for House Baratheon and House of the Dragon. Because although Lucerys exploded and the war began with Rhaenyra's fury, Lord Borros and his four storms are still very much alive and a major force in the upcoming war. The Stormlander armies are feared and numerous, a region of warriors that grew up as fierce as the hurricanes that boom across Shipbreaker Bay. At the moment, Borros has aligned himself with the Greens via the marriage pact between Aemond and one of the four storms. But a pact is not actually a marriage until they say the words and consummate the deal, as it were. So until that actually happens, Borros can kind of play both sides against the other so that he always comes out on top. He has 3 more unwed daughters to sell, and 2 sides on the brink of war know that the Stormlanders could very well be the tipping point. And do we ever know that Borros Baratheon has come to bargain? Although he was furious at the appearance of Lucerys in his hall, he still offered to make a marriage pact between himself and the Blacks, even though the ink on the alliance to the Greens and Aemond is still not dry. Borros is, at his prideful heart, a man trying to navigate the scenario for the best interests of House Baratheon alone. One way or another, he wants to see his grandchildren on the Iron Throne and with the blood of the dragon, just like Otto Hightower and Corlys Velaryon, and doesn't want to see his line wiped out and a Harrenhal of Storm's End as the dragons rage at each other from the north and the west. Unfortunately, one big thing will be holding back Lord Borros from achieving his goals: pride. Borros will at some point have to answer to Rhaenyra about how exactly her son ended up dead outside his hall and why he's seemingly taking marching orders from her half-brother Aegon. And it seems unlikely that he'll be willing to explain himself to the queen he just spurned. As soon as he formally enters the war with his armies, there will be a target on Lord Borros' back from dragon riders furious at him between Rhaenyra, Daemon, and Rhaenys. Lord Borros might be too prideful to mend that fence and make a marriage pact he needs to keep himself from becoming charcoal. So, expect to see Lord Borros hanging back and dragging his heels a bit, hoping the dragon riders kill each other before he enters the war. Any commander knows that being the first army into a war rarely goes well, especially when your declared enemies want you specifically dead. Whereas it's pretty easy to promise to enter the war and then drag your heels about actually doing it, waiting until an opportune moment to maximize your return, otherwise known as pulling a Tywin. So get ready to see some unexpected moves from the Lord of Storm's End. Remember that at all costs, what he wants is the Baratheons to not only survive, but to come out of the other side of this impending war as victors. And honestly, he can just deny what happened at Storm's End and blame it all on Aemond. He's got 3 daughters left to sell and the business end of a dragon to avoid, despite being, a typical Baratheon dude that just wants to wade into a battle with a battle axe. A tall order for a guy that can't read the marriage pacts he may be signing. But Borros is a Baratheon. At some point, he's going to lose his temper and go swinging to a battle like a wannabe storm god in a war of dragons.
Hello, you wonderful viewer. Thank you for making it to the end of this deep dive on the death of Lucerys, quote-unquote Velaryon, and the history of the rivalry between houses Baratheon and Targaryen. As a reward, I have a special surprise for you. Have you ever wanted to show off how big a fan you are of houses Blackwood and House Strong, or Helaena Targaryen and her love of bugs? Well, you're in luck. As of this video going live, I've uploaded 3 new designs to my Threadless shop that you are going to love, made by my longtime collaborator, Sanrixion. First, a stained glass mosaic of House Strong with their history and images representing their uncanny ability to survive through their many seeds, and individual images showing off every member of the family, including some secret ones. Next, we have our main man, Willem Blackwood, inspired by the thumbnail I made for my video on him, and 2 choices of unofficial house words for the Raveny boys of the Riverlands. And last but not least, this design for Bug Girl Helaena, showing Queen Helaena in a happier life as a Pokemon trainer with her centipede, spider, and dragon. You can get all of these as t-shirts, mugs, sweatshirts, tank tops, you name it, at joemagician.threadless.com. Thank you all for listening, and slam that subscribe and like button for more. Until next time.